Scary telling.
I still remember the day that Kaylee came to me and told me that she was pregnant. We were both sitting on my bed, scrolling through TikTok videos and laughing at the latest trends when she dropped the bombshell. At first, I didn't know what to say. I just sat there, staring at her in shock. Kaylee was only 17, and I knew that she couldn't get an abortion in our state without her parents' consent. Her parents were strict Catholics who believed that abortion was a sin. Kaylee was terrified that they would disown her if they found out she was pregnant. As her best friend, I wanted to help her. I couldn't bear to see her suffer like that. That's when I had an idea. I had heard that the neighboring state allowed minors to get abortions without their parents' consent. We could take a road trip there and get the procedure done. It was risky, but it was our only option. Kaylee was hesitant at first, but I could see the desperation in her eyes. We talked about it for hours, weighing the pros and cons. Finally, we made the impulsive decision to go through with it. The next day, we packed a bag and set out in my old and shaky Toyota Corolla. We were both nervous and scared, but we tried to act like we were just going on a fun road trip. We listened to music, sang along to the lyrics, and joked about how we were breaking the law. As we got closer to the border, our nerves started to kick in. What if we got caught? What if we didn't make it in time? But we pushed those thoughts aside and focused on our goal. That's when we saw the blue lights of an Idaho State Trooper's cruiser behind us. My heart sank, and I could feel the panic rising in my chest. I pulled over, and Kaylee clutched my arm tightly. The officer approached us, and I could see the suspicion in his eyes. I tried to act casual, but I knew that we were in trouble. He asked for our IDs and registration, and I handed them over, my hands shaking. That's when he noticed the backpack in the back seat. I could feel the color drain from my face as he unzipped it and found the pregnancy test. He looked at us with disgust, and I knew that we were done for. He called for backup, and soon we were surrounded by police cars. They searched the car and found the map to the abortion clinic. I knew that we were going to be arrested, but I couldn't help but feel like it was all my fault. I had convinced Kaylee to take this risk, and now we were paying the price. As they took us away in handcuffs, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. We had made a mistake, a big one, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we had no other choice. We were just two scared teenagers trying to do what we thought was right. But now, our lives would never be the same again. The ride to the police station was a blur of flashing lights and terrified thoughts. My mind was racing as I tried to come up with a plan, but it was no use. We had been caught, and there was no way out. We were processed at the station, our fingerprints and mugshots taken. I felt like a criminal, even though I knew that we were just trying to help a friend. Kaylee was silent, tears streaming down her face. I knew that she was scared, and I couldn't blame her. After a few hours, we were taken to separate holding cells. I sat on the hard, uncomfortable bed, staring at the bare walls. It was cold and smelled like disinfectant. I wondered how long we would be there, what would happen to us next. The next day, we were brought before a judge. We were charged with aiding and abetting the interstate travel of a minor with the intent of obtaining an abortion. The judge looked at us sternly, his eyes filled with disgust. "Are you aware of the severity of your actions?" he asked us. I wanted to say that we were just trying to help a friend, that we had no other choice. But I knew that it wouldn't matter. We had broken the law, and now we would have to face the consequences. We were assigned a public defender, a tired-looking woman who didn't seem to care about our case. She told us that we could face up to 5 years in prison and a hefty fine. The trial was a blur of lawyers and witnesses, each one painting us as criminals who were trying to evade the law. The prosecutor made it seem like we were part of some underground network that helped minors get abortions. It was ridiculous, but it seemed to be working. The worst part was seeing the looks on people's faces as we walked into the courtroom. Our small town had turned against us. People who we had known all our lives now looked at us with scorn and disgust. It was like we were the town pariahs. Kaylee was forced to carry the pregnancy to term, and it was a constant reminder of our mistake. I knew that she was suffering, and I couldn't do anything to help her. We were both trapped in this nightmare, and there was no way out. As the trial came to a close, I knew that we were going to be found guilty. The evidence was stacked against us, and there was no way to refute it. I tried to prepare myself for the worst, but it was hard. I didn't want to go to prison. I didn't want my life to be ruined. When the verdict was announced, I felt like my world had ended. Guilty. It was like a death sentence. I looked over at Kaylee, and I could see the tears streaming down her face. I knew that I had failed her, that I had let her down. As we were taken away in handcuffs, I couldn't help but feel like my life was over. I was only 18, and yet I was facing years in prison. All because I had tried to help a friend. It was a harsh lesson, one that I would never forget. The trial was a blur of courtrooms and lawyers. I felt like I was in a movie, like this couldn't be happening to me. But it was. I was facing years in prison for a mistake that I had made. It was a harsh lesson, one that I would never forget. The trial started with the prosecutor painting us as criminals who were trying to evade the law. He made it seem like we were part of some underground network that helped minors get abortions. It was ridiculous, but it seemed to be working. The worst part was seeing the looks on people's faces as we walked into the courtroom. Our small town had turned against us. People who we had known all our lives now looked at us with scorn and disgust. It was like we were the town pariahs. The prosecutor called witness after witness, each one testifying against us. He made it seem like we were heartless criminals who were trying to harm a child. It was a constant barrage of accusations, and I felt like I was drowning in them. Our public defender didn't seem to care about our case. She barely spoke to us and didn't put up much of a defense. I knew that we were in trouble, that there was no way out. Kaylee was forced to carry the pregnancy to term, and it was a constant reminder of our mistake. I knew that she was suffering, and I couldn't do anything to help her. We were both trapped in this nightmare, and there was no way out. As the trial went on, I could feel myself slipping into a depression. I was facing years in prison, and I didn't know how to cope. I missed my family, my friends, my life. I knew that it was all over. When it was my turn to testify, I tried to explain our reasoning. I told the judge that we were just trying to help a friend, that we had no other choice. But it was like he wasn't listening. He looked at me with cold, hard eyes, like I was a criminal. The trial lasted for what felt like weeks. Each day, I would wake up in my cell and wonder if this was all a dream. But it wasn't. It was my reality. As the trial came to a close, I knew that we were going to be found guilty. The evidence was stacked against us, and there was no way to refute it. I tried to prepare myself for the worst, but it was hard. I didn't want to go to prison. I didn't want my life to be ruined. When the verdict was announced, I felt like my world had ended. Guilty. It was like a death sentence. I looked over at Kaylee, and I could see the tears streaming down her face. I knew that I had failed her, that I had let her down. As we were taken away in handcuffs, I couldn't help but feel like my life was over. I was only 18, and yet I was facing years in prison. all because I had tried to help a friend. It was a harsh lesson, one that I would never forget. Being in prison was like living in a nightmare. I had never felt so alone, so scared, so powerless. Every day was a battle, a struggle to survive in a world that didn't want me. At first, I was in a state of shock. I couldn't believe that this was my life now. I missed my family, my friends, my freedom. But soon, I realized that I had to adapt if I wanted to make it out alive. The prison was overcrowded, and the cells were tiny. I shared a cell with 2 other women, both of whom had committed violent crimes. It was like living in a war zone. There were fights, stabbings, and riots. It was a constant state of chaos. The food was terrible, and the conditions were unsanitary. I felt like I was living in a third-world country. There was no privacy, no freedom, no hope. I missed Kaylee, too. She was in a different part of the prison, and I didn't get to see her often. When I did, she looked tired and defeated. I knew that she was suffering, and I couldn't do anything to help her. The days stretched on, and soon, they turned into months. I tried to stay strong, to keep my head up, but it was hard. I felt like I had lost everything, like I had nothing left to live for. But then, something strange happened. I started to make friends. The women in my cell became like sisters to me. We talked, laughed, and cried together. We supported each other, even when the world seemed to be against us. I also started to take classes. The prison offered GED courses, and I signed up. It gave me something to focus on, something to work towards. I wanted to make something of myself, even if it was from behind bars. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months. I found myself adapting to life in prison, even though I knew that I didn't belong there. But it was like I had found a new family, a new purpose. Of course, there were still bad days. Days when I missed my old life, days when I was scared, days when I felt like giving up. But I tried to push through them, to remind myself that I was still alive, that I still had a chance to make something of myself. Kaylee was still there, too. We didn't talk much, but when we did, we tried to lift each other up. We knew that we had made a mistake, but we also knew that we were still young, still had a chance to turn our lives around. I didn't know how long I would be in prison. I didn't know if I would ever get out. But I knew that I had to keep going, to keep pushing forward. Life in prison was a nightmare, but it was also a lesson. A lesson that I would never forget. After 2 years in prison, I was given a chance for redemption. The warden had heard about my progress in the GED courses and offered me a job in the prison library. I was ecstatic. It was a chance to give back, to help others who were going through the same struggles that I had. Working in the library was a dream come true. I spent my days surrounded by books, helping other women find their escape from the prison walls. It was like I had found my calling. The library was a haven for many of the women in the prison. It was a place where they could escape the chaos and find a moment of peace. I loved seeing the smiles on their faces as they picked out a book, or as they came to me with questions about the different programs we offered. I started to feel like I was making a difference. I had found a new purpose, a new reason to keep going. Even though I was still in prison, I knew that I was making a positive impact on the world. Kaylee had given birth to her baby, and I could see the change in her. She was still in prison, but she had a new sense of purpose, too. She was determined to be the best mother she could be, to give her child a better life than the one she had. As the months went by, I started to feel like I was a part of something bigger than myself. The women in the prison were like family to me, and I loved seeing them succeed, to see them find a new path in life. I started taking college courses, too. The prison offered an online program, and I signed up. I wanted to prove to myself that I was more than just a mistake, that I could still make something of myself. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months. I was still in prison, but I was no longer a prisoner. I was a librarian, a student, a friend. I had found a new purpose, and I was determined to make the most of it. As my release date approached, I felt a mix of emotions. I was excited to be free, to start a new chapter in my life. But I was also sad to leave the women behind, to leave the library, to leave the life that I had built for myself. But I knew that I was ready. I had learned so much in prison about myself and about the world. I had made mistakes, but I had also found redemption. I was ready to start over, to make something of myself in the outside world. When I walked out of the prison gates, I felt like a new person. The world was different, brighter, more alive. I had a second chance, and I was determined to make the most of it. Kaylee was there to greet me, with her baby in her arms. She looked tired, but happy. We hugged each other tightly, knowing that we had been through something that few people could understand. As we walked away from the prison, I felt like I was leaving a part of myself behind. But I also knew that I was taking something with me. I had found a new purpose, a new reason to keep going. I had found redemption.